So M&M's, what is the first good point we're starting with here?
So my good point to lead off with here is kind of tied into what we said in the intro is with Mongols reaching number 5 on the Valve rankings, with us having a major coming up in China, and I think a relatively successful event out in Singapore, I think we could potentially parlay this into a fantastic 2025 for Chinese and Asian CS. I think we had the potential to sort of bring it back, especially with the fortunes of Valorant going down worldwide. I'm very bullish about the future of Asian esports in general.
Okay.
Okay.
It's an interesting angle.
Be-
Go, you keep, if you got more, keep going, yeah.
I feel the traditional thought process with Chinese and Asian CS at large is, it's going up in 2019, going up, 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 up until Valorant comes out and it completely drops off a cliff. We see we see the entire Indian scene decamp to Valorant. We see the entire Thai scene decamp to Valorant. All the Indonesian, Singaporean players all head over there. The only players who really stayed was the Tyloo players, the Vici gaming players, and a handful of Mongolian players. But and Maui, you were out in Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. So I think for a LAN at a country that's never had really a tier 1 CS LAN since probably CS 1.6, what did you think of the crowd out there? Was the crowd receptive to the CS tournament? Do you think there was a level of grassroots excitement for the game, even though there were no Singaporean players out there?
Oh yeah, I mean the crowd at the Blast World Finals was legitimately fantastic. I was pretty blown away. For the World Finals last year, for example, we did Abu Dhabi, and that kind of just felt like a location that Blast was doing because they could probably get some sort of sponsorship for going there. I felt like there was some sort of, you get some sort of kickback by doing an event there. But for Singapore, I feel like Blast, well, they got Singapore Airlines as a sponsor and the local hotel, so that was good. That probably benefited them. But on top of that, I mean, the crowd, I mean, didn't it sound pretty good through the microphones?
Sounded
I actually
awesome,
really
man.
did.
Yeah, it sounded great. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was an arena. Well, I guess arena is kind of maybe using the term a little bit too liberally. Essentially, it was a 3.5K capacity auditorium that was sold out, and you could feel that. It was really booming in there.
I will say sometimes theaters can have way less capacity because they're designed for the sound. It'll sound like dope with 5K people or something. You're right, yeah.
And the thing is that actually what they told us is that the room that was in is actually one direction, it stretched back longer than actually the Royal Arena in Copenhagen. So people are people. I read one tweet that was, or not a tweet, a
Reddit comment or something.
Yeah, some kind of online comment. I forgot where, honestly.
Sorry for your loss. Yeah.
Yeah, at this point, true. That was just saying oh, this looks like it's just a small room or something like that or whatever. It's no, that was a lot of people, and I will say on top of that, the most respectful crowd I have ever been around. Period. Obviously I want to be biased and say oh, I am Dallas had the best crowd I've ever had, and I do.
In what sense? As in, you think even the team they didn't like, they
Okay.
cheered for some? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, they just cheered for Counter-Strike. They were cheering for good CS.
Right.
They were even hearing if we were making jokes, and sometimes you'd get chuckles out of them here and there. And on top of that, they would cheer for the good moments, not necessarily. Well, they would cheer for everything. They would cheer for a lot of good stuff, and even, of course, they're going to cheer for an eco ace. For whatever reason, there were 3 eco aces in the playoffs. So it's yes, they for the ace part of it, they are going to cheer for the last kill, which is great. But when I say respect, I legitimately mean when Henry and I would get off the casting booth, they would be in a straight single file line to greet us in the area where we have to move through. And if we want to say no, we could have easily walked away and said no, because they were just lining up with their own good faith that they thought we would do signatures and photos, which we did because they were in such an orderly line where we got off. And normally at a lot of places, people just kind of crowd you sort of aimlessly. They just it's just an amorphous blob of people who are all kind of it almost feels like you're moving through an obstacle course of people. You have to move through these traffic cones, doing a dribbling drill or something. But this time it was just a straight up line, and they would just ask one by one politely for signatures or a photo. And then oftentimes they asked they always said a nice thing, and they were actually fans of CS. People approached me in Singapore that said, I'm a big fan of Snake and Banter. They said I'm a big fan of Hot Take Point Made. I'm a big fan of your stream. I'm a big fan of your own YouTube content. The casting you did was really good. Are you gonna ever cast more? I'm a big fan of you on the desk. I'm glad you got.
Then you were like, all right, Mom, you didn't need to come all the way here to tell me that. Fucking hell. I know this run. And also, you know what? You're actually taller than I thought in real life, and you're good looking as well. Bloody hell, man. Give me a break, okay?
No, it was like every single possible compliment under the sun is what I'm talking about. Like as opposed to sometimes you go places and unfortunately their grasp of English, or maybe they're not big enough fans in the space. They're like, can I just get a signature? Can I get a photo?
Sure.
But they were actually saying varied
Oh no, put it this way. I will say I know what you sort of mean. Like put it this way. You know when you go to an event and someone, like if, for example, if you do a signing session and someone asks you for a signature, but you don't know, do they even know who you are? Maybe they just know who Anders is or something.
Yeah.
It's not like that, because I know what you mean by that. In a lot of events, you get the feeling sometimes people ask for the picture or the signature just because you're there. They might not even really be a fan of yours. But you actually felt like they were authentic. Yes,
they were authentic. Right. They were absolutely authentic fans, even though, and they even booed Valorant a couple times. Like that's how hardcore they were.
Good.
Okay. By the way, it is okay to like both games. I don't know why that's like a thing. Like, oh, they even like showed the right faith. Yeah, they booed the Rajcula game. Okay, Mario, all right. I didn't know you were on that ship. Fair enough.
They cheered for the duck. They cheered for the duck. They booed the rabbit. Yeah, even though flip it upside down, exact same thing. And that is I think there are classic stories of that where it's like a fan will come to a signing session and they'll be like, oh man, Machine, I'm such a huge fan of you, and it's like come up to you and you're like, I love you, Machine. You're like, all right, yeah, there you go. But it seems like they were like really engaged in the shirts. Some of the shirts they had on Twitter and Reddit that people were posting of like older CS memes written on them, a lot of like good content that showed. I think it's a very engaged like esports crowd out there in Singapore. And to that point, it's less organized, but I feel like every event we've had in China recently, like the fans are ravenously interested in CS. Like they're crowding the team buses. I think at the start of the year at Chengdu, they're waiting outside of the hotels. The security's having to keep basically everyone out of the hotels because they're so engaged in the game. And even if their teams aren't successful, I think out there you have pretty authentic fans, which I would like to counter with recent events out in IM Rio. We see out there like that crowd is very partisan. It's very interested in Brazilian teams. It doesn't have a whole lot of interest for just the game itself. They're there for the Brazilian team. And then like you said, out in Dubai, we don't really get a crowd because the event is out there purely for sponsor reasons. And especially we're going to probably see more events out in Riyadh, and the crowd there is small. It's not engaged. It's mainly just people there from the families of the teams, the groupies of the teams, a very small contingent of actual fans, which if I'm hoping next year we're going to see more events, I would love to see more events out in I would love to see another event out in Ulaanbaatar, the Mongolian capital. Even though it's such a small country, when we've had RMRs or we've had Mongolian events out there, we've also seen just insane crowds. And if we have a team like Mongols that is peaking right ahead of the major, I think there's a world in which Mongols could make a top 16 finish at this major based on what we've seen of them coming right out of just winning Thunder Pick. So if we can have a team that the Asian fans can like rally behind and get excited for, then I think the sky's really the limit for what we can get in terms of fan engagement last year. Especially, I would say the only thing that kind of crushes it is the fact that friend of the show, I presume, Kassad, the Bleed organization, which is like the only tier 1 non-Chinese organization out there, completely shit the bed and fell apart. So that would be one thing I would say is a downside, but they were, they had a European squad as well. So it wasn't like they were really targeting an Asian market. And we've even recently seen so this is like kind of a very like nerdy point, but I was a big fan of the Thai scene before Valorant came out because they had a very well structured scene, almost like the German scene where you have you have 99 damage, like Div 3, Div 2, Div 1, then you go to the ESL Meisterschaft. They had essentially that program out there in Thailand where they had multiple different divisions of teams, and we had a couple of teams there that were close to making the major in the final year of the Asia Minor before Valorant and before COVID. And unfortunately, all those players decamped back to Valorant when that game came out. But recently, you've seen more and more players coming back, like Team NKT. That was a team that had like Xcurit, Bentet, Impression, Gratisfaction on it. They now host a fully Thai team again. It's not really successful, but the fact that there are, pros willing to come back to CS is just like another sign that there is returning interest all across Asia for Counter-Strike. And that's the big thing I think we're missing in CS2 compared to especially like 1.6, where we had, a successful Korean team that could challenge for, world championships in their time. And compared, just having come out of League of Legends Worlds, like seeing, a super successful Asian team that dominates the entire scene, like that's something we're missing. I think that really can like make CS a global esport again.
No, I will say, I mean, there's obviously a lot there. First of all, on the whole thing of like, the idea you could like expand into Asia. The saddest thing people probably don't realize is what you just said. The dirty secret about Asian Counter-Strike is not the notion that they just don't like Counter-Strike or FPS games. That's just not true. Like if people don't know, games like Crossfire, which is basically the Korean clone of Counter-Strike. And actually, I always say this, at the end of CS 1.6, they had a version in China called CS Online that was just 1.6 modded to be free to play and have its own skin market, believe it or not. I had like a weird skin market. And those games, I can tell you, were making like insane revenue. If you ever looked online, they were making a lot of money from things like skins and people buying things, because that's the other reason why it's so bizarre that they haven't been able to nail the publishing for these games. Actually, Valorant is the closest they've come, is because actually also Asia is a region that loves to buy like cosmetics and silly things, and even things, by the way, that are just pure cosmetics and have zero like play to win component, just things for your team, or like obviously cutesy anime type shit and all fucking things. So what's weird is I actually think this has always been the untapped market in esports, is Counter-Strike, or back in the day Quake and stuff in Asia. Like as you say as well, if you ever go to events, the people who go to the events, because there obviously are a lot of big CS events there, you get people where they aren't just like a guy from that city. They'll tell you shit like, I just got on like a 7-hour train because I'm like a CS guy, and there's only ever like, I don't know, League of Legends tournaments in my country, and so like, I had to come to this one CS event, and I came like 7 hours on a train, or I travelled 2 days or something mental. So I actually do feel like it is quite a receptive region to having tournaments. The key thing for me, I always mention, I'll mention it for the millionth time, is Valve just has to do a better job understanding how you publish games in Asia. Their problem is they really are like some old school game dev / publisher, where they just figure like, just get Steam and get the game, like as all everyone in the world buys games the same way. Whereas I always say, in Korea, by the way, you like in China you have to have it in the PC cafe. In Korea you need it in the PC cafe, and you have to do like a marketing campaign, because Korea, especially, it's obviously a smaller country than China. Korea is all about getting it to be like a social phenomenon, basically. If that happens, it can get massive. If people want to know the obvious example, obviously Overwatch could never have been the biggest game of the year, but it is one of the only games that very briefly was able to dislodge League of Legends in the PC cafes. And that's because, first of all, it's a Blizzard game, and obviously Koreans love StarCraft and Blizzard games. But I believe also they did do a really heavy marketing push when it came out the first year. And I think they even did something similar to League, where if people don't know, in League of Legends, if you go to the PC cafe, you get all the champions. You don't have to buy them with Riot points. You just unlock them all. So it automatically encourages the PC cafe to have the game, and then people to play from the PC cafe. So I think they did something similar in Overwatch. I think when it launched, you maybe got like, I can't remember what it was you got extra, but you got maybe like a cosmetic or something if you played in the cafe. So these are like simple concepts, but crucially, this is the downside. The reason that probably won't happen, unfortunately, is a bit like why we have all these problems in European Counter-Strike, which is you sort of need people in Valve who liaise with like the community, and as far as I can tell, they don't really have that in Asia. With that said, though, I do agree. I actually think the market is right there. I think if anyone was able to tap into it, part of it would be by doing events, etc. I think there's probably millions of people that you could add to the broadcast. And also, on the last point, what you just said about League, that is always the bomber. Even though I am a CS and a Quake person, and very much like an FPS gamer, I always tell people, right, what's funny now is, you notice most people forget the games now, and they go, of course Faker's the greatest player ever in esports. Bro, I used to have a really hard time convincing anyone that was even plausible in his first few years, because everyone's whole shit was, but he plays League of Legends. Like, who gives a fuck about League of Legends if you're a Counter-Strike or a Quake or a StarCraft player? But I always tell people, here's the biggest upside to League of Legends and a player like Faker. He doesn't ever have to wonder, and what if this region had played the game? Would I have been the best? Every major region plays League of Legends, if you don't know. Like, everyone. Like, as you saw there, like, Korea's amazing, China's insane, Europe has a whole... Even North America, when they say it's falling off, they still have millions and millions of dollars going into those teams, etc. The real problem in a game like Counter-Strike, and I've had to say this to my friends who are European, is even people like Get Right, I was like, here's the problem, Get Right. You might not know this, but there probably was some guy who was better than you at Counter-Strike. He just never played it, bro. He was Korean and he played StarCraft, or he played League of Legends, or he was Chinese and he played Dota 2. Like, what we actually will never know in CS is where are all the best players? Because as a last point, if anyone follows Valorant, in the first couple of years, it was not too dissimilar to CS. The best Korean team could like vaguely compete. They could make like a top 6 run or something. the best like Chinese team, they could do like an upset in the group stage. If people don't know this, last year the best team was a Korean team. They were the best team in the whole world. Like, and then the Paper X team's mega. So there have been not just good, like exceptionally good, on the level like Eminem's sin of 1.6. Where we actually used to have like the We Made Fox team could have like won a major. They were in like finals and shit. They were fucking around and going really deep in tournaments. So I do think it's one of these areas where people dismiss it because they think to themselves, oh, they just don't like FPS. They do, but you have to sort of, like every region and every market, you have to cater to that market. You have to know who they are and what they like and how to get them on board and how to get people to try the game first and then get hooked on the game and all that. Because if you do all that, like, as we see here, the events are ready. We're already ready to go there. And I always tell people, if it's actually, I'll bring it back to the Singapore angle, because I was actually going to do this as my good point, but I can switch it up. I can do that on the fly. The thing I actually think was excellent about the Singapore event is, I'm not exaggerating, that looked like an event. Look, I obviously wouldn't fly to Singapore to watch a CS event. I'm a bit old in my career for that, and I'm a bit jaded to go as a fan to watch CS. But like that one, ironically, if I lived in that region, looks like an event I would want to attend. As you guys are saying, one, the setup looked really good. I've always said on this show, by the way, I much prefer sell the crowd out and have a smaller venue rather than have a really big venue and maybe you have more fans but just make it look empty. I hate the empty look. The empty look is such a fucking bummer when the shot pans. I'd rather have a 3K place, if that's what you're saying it is, but filled to the rafters and looking like it's a bouncing venue, you know. That looks sick. And then also, I definitely agree on the like neutral crowd aspect. The reason I've always said the best crowd in Counter-Strike history is the Cologne crowd is because it's not even just a German thing. They do just cheer for everyone. And maybe it's also because it's in Central Europe and everyone goes there. It's a very easy place to get to. It's clean. It's a modern country and all that jazz, you know. But and the stadium's excellent. It's a proper arena. I had similar vibes on a smaller scale from this event. Like as you're saying, especially with the contrast of Rio, which might be the most biased crowd ever. This did look like, I'm not joking, I couldn't totally have been able to tell if I didn't watch many games. If I watched 3 games randomly, I guarantee I wouldn't necessarily know which teams they like the best out of this event. Like, I agree with you. They were both into it and respectful. And what I mean by that is they clearly were getting into teams that they aren't the biggest fan of. But then also, even when they didn't like the team, I could tell at the end they were respectful if they thought it was a good game. So, no, I thought all in all, but I actually think this event was a slam dunk. It's funny, it comes on the heels of the fall finals where everyone's flaming it because it had all the like food problems and the venue looked shit and the Acadian Astralis drama going on. This event was fire. It's funny, think of how many times, Maui, we've donked on the World Finals as being not a very good event. This actually was easily their best World Finals. Like this one even had I actually think the only bummer on this one wasn't even their fault. It's just the Vitality having Jack's angle. Aside from that, everything else went dynamite at this event. What's not to like? I thought it was great.
Yeah. Oh no, this World Final was easily the best. I mean, what did they do before? It was Abu Dhabi twice, and I think Bahrain. And
that was one.
Yeah.
And I don't remember any of those 3. They even like 2 years ago, Abu Dhabi versus last year Abu Dhabi, the crowd improved, but it still wasn't full. It was probably about half, if even that. And this time, I mean, no, the Singapore crowd rocked it. And they, like you said, I mean, they just flat out cheered for Counter-Strike in a neutral way. That's something that they basically just lightly rooted for whatever team I would say was the most popular. Like Navi would have probably been the biggest.
Sure.
But they weren't there in the playoffs. G2 and FaZe had a huge amount of fans.
Sure.
Vitality actually had more fans than their opponent also. So no, it was really good. Like Vitality had more fans than Mouse is what I mean. But yeah, no, G2 I think had more fans than Vitality. And for Astralis Spirit, I think they were rooting for Donk, but they were also, I think, rooting for Astralis, which was nice. It's like they're just cheering for.
By the way, that's actually somewhat informed in itself that they actually are fans of Donk. Remember, he hasn't played even a whole year yet at Tier 1, so the fact they even know him, like I wouldn't blame them if there's fans of Astralis in that game. You know, make more sense, right?
They're informed on recent developments in the scene. Like if they were like, oh, you know, Astralis wins 4 majors, generic like fan approval, but knowing who Donk is, I think shows that they haven't just started, recently watching like a week before the week before the World Finals.
Yes.
Maui, I saw. Fair enough. No, I saw like you heard something about Donk and the Donk sense went off, but with that as well, you know, you mentioned Paper Rex there, I think like a couple minutes ago. What people may not know as well is that all those players on that team before their most recent roster changes, those were all CS players. They all went together as a 5-man squad. So anyone who also says there's not enough like FPS talent in Asia to have a world-class team is just flat out wrong. All the most successful players in the Valorant teams right now in Asia usually either were pros in CS or played a bit of CS on the side before coming over to Valorant as well. So there's just so many things that need to click for it to happen. But I think we're as close as we've been to it happening in Asia since maybe 2019 when we used to have all those iSeries out in Asia.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or be a pleb and don't.